We'll be installing the stinger today. This is how you'll receive it in the box, and we'll take it apart. As you'll notice, I've pre-wired all of the connections from the fans to your main wiring harness, and this is all hooked up to the Bowden tube. This is an E3D. All the wires have been calculated to the length so they fit behind the cover. You'll see I have the shrink wrap on all the wires. This is all prepared, ready to install into the stinger. It goes up alongside the stinger on the side brackets. There's a couple things we're going to look at first before we get started. We're going to disassemble some of the covers that come on the stinger. The front cover, or front top cover. Two number 1 Phillips screws. We'll set those aside. Okay, and this is what they call the keeper. We're going to take the keeper ring off. Pay attention to the cutout in the back of the ring toward the back of the stinger chassis, how this comes off. I leave the screws in so we don't lose them. They don't roll around. And the 2 keepers, they're little half round pieces that come out. We're going to be using those shortly. The first thing I like to do is fit the keepers to the E3D. Not all E3Ds and E3D clones are the same. We like to use what we call a shim. We'll use Teflon tape in there. And the idea is to have a little bit of space between the keeper and the E3D so that it has a very tight fit in there. You don't want it to rotate in the keeper. This is the Teflon tape. We just rip off a little piece so it's manageable. You can always add more to it. I've already applied some to it, so this is just an example of how you do it. You want it to go up under the 2 shoulders of the undercut. Wrap that right around nice and tight, no wrinkles. Okay, that's all prepared for when we want to install the keepers around it. So, doing a little test fit here. You're just making sure that you've got a little bit of pressure there when you install that. Okay, next step. This is your length. We've got an example of that. Gets tucked up behind the cover. It's important that you've got a little bit of slack in the wires so that the actuator can move there. Those are the typical colored wires that come out of the CR10 or the Creality products. It's a blue and yellow wire for the hot end cooling fan. This is the pre-wired induction probe, and we're going to set that aside for now. That's already pre-wired and hooked up to the sim probe. We've already got that mounted. This is what we call the chassis and the backing plate. That's the spacer in the back. You'll see there's 4 screws that typically hold this on to the Creality products. They're actually captive in there. Now you see the 4 places they go. The 2 that I just pointed out are the original hot end, where the hot end bolts up to it, the Creality hot end. And you're going to get into these access holes, and the chassis lifts up maybe a 1/8 of an inch or so you can get on the screw. You're going to put those 2 screws in first. You want to make sure that you're not cross-threading them. Keep the plate nice and straight. Keep your wrench nice and straight. And you only want to start these maybe 2 threads. All the screws have to go in at the same time, and there is a sequence to it. So you want to run these maybe 2 to 3 turns. Now you know that it's on there. The next one is the spring retainer screw up on the top. The reason we put this in is the chassis can't move if it is sticking out. So we're going to put that in a little bit further, a few more threads, and then there's a hole, an access hole in that left bracket. And we go through that, and you can see me pull up on the chassis so that it lines up with the access hole in the back. And we're going to go right back up to the top, and those 2 screws are real important that we put them in sequence like that. Now we're coming in to the back, and we're on one of the original 2 screws on the right hand side, and we're going to go ahead and tighten those up. Remember, these are tiny little 3mm screws, so it's all relative. Tight is relative in this case. And I like to go around maybe 2 or 3 times and just check the tension on those. You can actually see behind the backing plate and between the chassis if you look straight down on it. Make sure that you're on the screws. Okay, next step. We're going to try to keep these wires out of the way while we install the hot end. And this is why we did the that little tape shim to begin with. Just take everything in order. Make sure your fan wires aren't crossed over in front of the or behind the hot end. Your keepers go on. Flange up. Okay, make sure you have them lined up. The nozzle sticks out of the front, the heater block sticks out the back. There's a split in the ring, and that lines up in the front. You'll see the split in the front and rear. Line those up as perfect as you can. Okay, and there's a bevel on the bracket. As you put that up through there, it should slip right up there and pull those 2 halves together. You may have to just wiggle them as you bring them up a little. Keep the wires out of the way. Make sure you don't get a wire in there. There's 2 holes there. I like to take an Allen wrench or a pick and get in there and line those holes up with the 2 adjacent holes in the chassis. Makes your next step go a lot smoother. Your ring has a groove in the back. You slip that over your Bowden tube. And you want to make sure these screws are going straight down when you screw them down. Don't try to screw one screw down at a time. Just go back and forth on them. Bring them down in sequence. You want to make sure your block is straight and perpendicular on the bottom before you tighten those. Now you're checking for play. Make sure there's no wires in there. You'll check for that movement as you're putting this together on that Stinger chassis. That way if there's something binding on it, you don't have to take the whole thing apart at the end. Okay, our next step is to snap the front cooling fan on. You want that as high as you can, all the way up to the top against the chassis. Next, your fans. There'll be keyhole slots in the side of the fans. The screws come pre-started on the edges on both sides of those, and there's just enough space to slot that flange over the top of those 2 screws. You'll get in there with an Allen wrench, a ball head Allen wrench that's supplied with your CR10 or your Creality product. You'll do one at a time. You'll be setting these fangs up so that they don't touch. When the Stinger does a touch off, you don't want the fangs to touch the bottom. You want them down as far as you can. The fang is set so that when it touches off all the way down, if you pushed it all the way down, it'll touch the your build plate or your bed. You want to pull up. There'll be a little space at the top you'll see stick up above the chassis. That's the amount of space you'll have below, the amount of slack you have below. This is a neat little trick. You loosen your screw with the slot. The slot is to the outside, and you'll push your probe all the way down. Each one of those threads is about 1 millimeter, so you push it all the way down and then you pull it up. You'll feel it click as it comes up, each thread, and then you tighten it. Now this is neat. That's also slotted, so you can loosen both of those screws for your final adjustment, and you can slide that whole block assembly up and down for a final adjustment. Just look for about 2, no more than 3 millimeters between the chassis and that blue plastic tip on the induction probe. Okay, we're just getting the wires straightened out through here. The one in the middle is the wire for the wire harness, and the one on the outside is for your sim probe or your probe wire. Just kind of slide it. There's a flange that fits over the back. Just make sure you've got enough slack in the wires down below that they bend a little bit. You need movement there. We're installing the 2 metal screws from the back. Now there's a lot of movement as your Bowden tube goes back and forth, your x-axes, so you'll want to leave a loop of wire that comes out of your induction probe. You leave a little loop there so that it doesn't strain where it goes into the top of the induction probe. There's a little groove in the back of the front cover. Here's that loop I was talking about. Just make sure there's a loop there. Don't fasten that to the Bowden tube. Just leave that hang freely. There's the groove. That's where your fan wire, center it if you can, lines up in there so it doesn't get pinched. You're screwing into plastic, so be careful. That's it. Check for movement again. You see your red light up there is on. When it's activated, it goes off. That's a safety feature. So that's telling you you're getting the signal to your induction probe. Sim probe installation. This is the sim probe relay. It's a double pull, double throw. Works on normally closed and normally open. You'll use your existing ZN switch wire or plug on your Creality that unplugs out of the mechanical switch. The probe comes all pre-wired. There's plenty of wire to get to your tip on all different size machines. That's the original wire you just attached on the other end. There's 2 hammer nuts or T-nuts that you fasten to the rail. Line them up parallel to the rail. And you'll use the NC. They're both marked. The NC is the outside socket, and that is mated to the plug on the Crealities. Just give those a couple turns. That's it. The other end, you've got a power supply, 12-volt power supply wire. We're going to hook that up next. We're going to go around to the back. It goes through the grommet with the rest of the wires. You'll see it here. We pushed it in through there. The wire comes pre-cut but not bare on the end, so you can just push it through there. Very important you pull the plug out of the back of the unit in case there's a plug in the wall and you think you're unplugging your 110 volts from your unit and you're pulling a different plug. You could have a surprise later. So this is the best plug to pull for safety's sake. I'm going to speed this up. You don't need to see me fumble with these 5 screws on the bottom. This is kind of intimidating for some people, but the access to those 12 volt wire terminals is right underneath this cover, so it's a real easy one. Slide that off there. Okay. There's 6 on all of these low voltage. There's a black and a red wire that come in. These are our wires over here. The black goes to the minus. You've got, we'll close in on this a little bit more. The 1, 2, and 3 is the positive, DC positive, 12 volts. All 3 of those screws. The next 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the negative 12 volt DC. You want to make sure the black goes to the negative, right there, and the red goes to the positive over on that side. Any one of those 3. You'll see I've hooked my 2 wires up side by side, one to number 3 and one to number 4. Okay, that about wraps it up. If you have any questions, be sure to visit our website. My name is Dave Aschenbrenner. I am technical at 3dprinttoform.com. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope to see you in an upcoming video. Thanks.